Let's bow our heads. We'll have a little opening prayer here. Father in heaven, we do thank you for another beautiful day, Lord. We thank you for the time this week of studying your word, learning your plans. And so we just ask for your blessing now, your spirit to guide us as we review and to learn more of you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, so this week we're looking at going through the Red Sea. And our lesson kind of started with, we're in Exodus chapter 12. And it was kind of interesting, actually. Always come up with more questions as we study. Of course, we get into the firstborn a little bit later here in the lesson. But I was kind of reading through again here in Exodus chapter 12, starting at verse 29. It says, "And it came to pass at midnight that the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. And so Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead." And that term, the firstborn, there is kind of interesting because later on in our lesson, of course, the firstborn is referring to the firstborn male.
Yes.
So the question in my mind is, if the firstborn was a female, were they killed in this Passover night? And I don't know if they were.
Moses is silent.
Yeah. And it was also interesting and kind of some of my reading on this whole issue that, and of course you get reading the different commentators, and I don't know if they're 100% sure which Pharaoh was, what his name was at the time, but they said but one of the things I read was that if this was Pharaoh such and such in his name, and he lost his son, and he died in the Red Sea, then in fact he had no heirs and his wife became the ruler, which they said was kind of an ultimate embarrassment in this whole thing of, especially where you had a bunch of people who like to build pyramids and stuff like that. Deb?
Maybe you can tell me where it is, but in our reading, it said that Pharaoh's horsemen and chariots and all were in the Red Sea, but does it actually say that Pharaoh was, or was he on the bank watching it take place?
That was addressed, Deb, in our lesson. It uses, I forgot the verse, it's not in Exodus. It's later.
What was in Psalms?
Did we miss it?
It's not in
Yep.
Exodus, but
No, the verse is
it's in Psalms. that's
Oh,
right.
in Psalms, yes. And it was, yes, in Thursday's lesson, it did reference a psalm there that talked about Pharaoh being killed there. And
Yeah, 136:15.
yeah, and evidently from from my other reading there on that, they must have, when they were talking about the succession there of who was going to be ruler, that they must have assumed also that
Somehow we missed that.
Pharaoh was killed.
All right.
Okay, so without reading this whole section here verse by verse, we know that they were given permission to leave because, as it says, Pharaoh rose up and there was a great cry, and then he, that is Pharaoh, called for Moses and Aaron by night and said, "Rise, go out from among my people, both you and the children of Israel, and go and serve the Lord as you have said. Also take your flocks, your herds, as you have said, and be gone, and bless me also." And this is what kind of our lesson was kind of bringing up there, that this, what did Pharaoh ask for along with giving out permission for everybody to leave?
blessing on himself.
Okay, he asked for a blessing too. Yeah, he was
Yeah.
in the moment, as they say. he realized that it was checkmate, I guess you could say.
Right.
The Lord had done what he said he was going to do, and the whole land was crying out in sorrow.
He took a straw poll,
Yeah,
as politicians do, and decided
Yep.
he would go along with.
and so he asked for the blessing. Bless me also. And what were the rest of Egyptians doing at the same time? While Pharaoh was asking for the blessing, what were the rest of the Egyptians doing?
Giving away their wealth.
Okay, now were they giving away their wealth at that point? Because we're at the point now where the death angel has gone through, and the firstborn have been killed, and then it says, and the people urged, and the Egyptians urged the people that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, we shall all be dead. So I believe that when they were asking for the gold and the silver and the clothes, that was actually the beginning of the night and not the end of the night. Because remember, they had said that Moses told Pharaoh, this is what's going to happen. And then if you look back through, that they actually requested this down payment, so to speak, or this reparations, evidently before the Passover occurred. But there says they had asked the Egyptians, but I'm questioning whether they were doing this after the firstborn were killed, or if actually it was before, because it seems like the Egyptians had had enough, and they, in a sense, this may have happened, beforehand, because they didn't want it to happen. They had been told what's going to happen. Craig first had his hand up
Yeah,
first.
just stepping back a little bit, where we were discussing the beginning, kind of where whether or not the firstborn meant the firstborn male or firstborn male or female. And like you said in the lesson, it kind of alluded to as firstborn male. But in verse 30, it says, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. So there must have been families that didn't have a boy. So
That's the way it was presented in last week's lesson.
Yeah, I just kind of, it's kind of been going both ways a little bit
yeah,
on what actually, because it could have been the father who died in the family. If he was the firstborn from his family,
that's true.
then he would have died. So it's kind of, I find it was kind of, I had always thought the firstborn, male, female, didn't matter, that they died. But then when I got looking this week, studying the firstborn again, there was a difference there. Dennis?
Some of the story is here for the story, and if you push it hard for the details, you can undo yourself. We need to concentrate on the story for what it means, and not be so fundamentalist that we have to make every detail fit. In the story of the livestock, it says all the livestock is dead, and then in the next plague, well, they had to tend their livestock, and all the horses of Egypt had died, but yet Pharaoh still had horses for his chariots. We need to pay attention to the narrative of the story and not push the details.
So how sincere was Pharaoh in his request for the blessing?
Only in the moment.
Yeah, I think Jerry said it. In that moment, he was sincere. But after that, he completely did another 180.
I guess I wouldn't say his heart was truly sincere, he was doing, again, what he thought would get him out of this mess.
That's what I was gonna say, was there a change of heart, or
Right.
was it,
The expediency of it, yeah.
because we see because back in, not last week, but the week before, when I was going over the plagues, did he realize the problem? Did he ever recognize there was a problem?
No.
Yes, he did,
Well, yes,
because he said we have sinned.
right.
It's because, this has happened because of our sin. In fact, I don't know if I can find it quick enough, but it was, chapter 11, verse 27. Pharaoh sent and called for Moses and Aaron and said to them, I have sinned this time, the Lord is righteous, and my people and I are wicked. Entreat the Lord that there may be no more mighty thundering and hail, for it is enough. I will let you go, and you shall stay no longer. So,
Right, he's telling them what they wanna hear, so to speak.
well, yes, he's saying what he
He's
feels
saying.
needs to be said at the time.
Right,
And then I'm just looking down there. In verse 34, and when Pharaoh saw that the rain, the hail, and the thunder had ceased, he sinned yet more, and he hardened his heart,
right.
he and his servants. So the heart of Pharaoh was hard, neither would he let the children of Israel go, as the Lord had spoken by Moses. So, Deb,
But isn't it a great parallel with Pharaoh and his kingdom in Egypt and Satan with his kingdom on this earth? They kind of both know what they're in for, but they're gonna keep fighting for that kingdom.
yeah. Yeah, and in fact, the kind of the irony of this whole thing, and I've kind of got some other little things to share on this parallel with the future,
Yes,
is that when Satan comes as an angel of light, who's he pretending to be? He wants to be Christ. Why? Because he wants to worship, doesn't he?
right. He
You know,
wants to work.
It's not that he wants to be like Jesus,
Right,
but he wants to be like Jesus for the worship value
correct.
and for the praise and the adoration and the power and the control and all that stuff. So where's the heart in this? Well, obviously the heart's in the wrong place
Right.
in Satan in the future. The heart was in the wrong place here with Pharaoh as well.
A lot of parallels with this in end times.
Yeah.
Lot.
The whole thing, and that's why, our lesson right in the beginning was that this is a story of deliverance and salvation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like what Dennis has mentioned, sometimes we can get right into the details when the big picture is deliverance and salvation. And even in that, and we notice, I remember teaching like one of the first or second lessons, said, okay, how long did it take God to deliver the children of Israel from their slavery and their bondage? And we have this whole back and forth between Moses and Pharaoh, and it's always back and forth, back and forth. And so how long did it take? Well, it wasn't just an instantaneous thing, which it's the same like today. We talk about delivery from oppression and slavery and ill-gotten gains and all this stuff. Is this something that is just going to happen just like that? If people riot in the streets and burn the businesses in their own neighborhood thinking that this is all of a sudden going to deliver them from the problems they're in. But no, it's not. The Lord has a way of doing things. In fact, I mentioned last week when I was teaching the other week, and we read, I think it was probably chapter 11, first 5 verses. He said, look, everybody's in here. We had Moses acting on behalf of God. We had Aaron being the prophet. We had prophet being or Pharaoh being the main instigator. We had the Egyptians, peoples. We had Israelites. And we said, we looked at this whole thing. God was trying to save everybody. He's trying, the whole thing was that they may know that I am God.
Yeah.
That's repeated over and over. I'm doing this that they may know that I am God. Because that was the big issue through the whole thing. Who's God and who's not. And this whole struggle goes on and on and on. And now we're to the point where, and we see that there's a struggle, a point of struggle through all these different plagues, but there is a point where deliverance starts to come. And even deliverance, was it automatically on that night? When on the night of Passover, when it was determined who was and who wasn't God's people, in the end, that's not the end of the story. In fact, our whole lesson this week is what? What happens next? They're on the path of salvation. They're on the path of deliverance. But there's still some things to go through. In fact, from hindsight, we see that the whole plan got derailed for 40 years later on, when God still was trying to get them to the promised land.
He even
Yeah.
took them. He didn't take them, I forgot where in our lesson, and then obviously in Exodus. God specifically led them not on a direct, point A to point B line to the promised land. He took them to the wilderness to start with.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yes, all right.
So somewhere in my notes here, I think we got to that.
It's all right.
Okay, so we see that this whole thing in our lesson, I think I just wanted to point out that this whole issue of Pharaoh, get me a blessing as well while you're
Yeah.
while you're at it. Include me in on that. Was as we see, looking back at the whole story, that there was not a change of heart, and he comes back again. Sin.
In Patriots and Prophets with this week's lesson, it compared his feeling sorry to Judas. That was the same kind of, I'm sorry, God, as
Yeah.
Judas had. They didn't, they were sorry they got caught,
Caught,
in
yeah.
other words.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I got caught.
Right.
Yeah, and at times we may be guilty of that ourselves, but we certainly see enough of it around of being sorry for what happened, but it goes right back out. And I know this, Roger deals with this quite a bit, and I was, went to Thomaston and went to the state prison for probably almost 10 years. And everybody's sorry and wants to do better when they're in there, but when they get out,
Yeah.
it is extremely difficult
Recidivism is
to go. And it does happen. Some guys do make it,
Yep.
but the percentage-wise, it's not real hopeful because of what a heart changed really is. Okay, so in the process here, and this was kind of another question I had in our lesson on Monday, was this consecration of the firstborn. And of course, the end of chapter 12, it talks about, and it came to pass on that very same day that the Lord brought the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt according to their armies. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, consecrate to me, or sanctify unto me, all the firstborn. And I'm not exactly sure, is this something that Moses said the next morning when they all woke up and the firstborn had slain? Did Moses say this at that point? Or is this something that kind of is directly related, because the firstborn had just been slain, that this consecration or sanctifying of the firstborn was something that was going to happen based on this? In other words, is it an exact timeline here, or is it something that's related to the slaying of the firstborn? So the Lord memorialized this and gave them the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which of course was given as well in other places. So I just kind of mentioned it already, but looking at Exodus 13 verses 1 to 16, there are a number of activities mentioned in this passage. And what was the main purpose or focus of these activities?
So they wouldn't forget.
Okay, so they wouldn't forget.
Right.
So they wouldn't forget what?
The great deliverance the Lord
Okay,
did for them.
okay.
What God had done for them in the past.
Hmm?
What God had done for them in the past.
Okay, that God had done this thing. In fact, there's kind of some specific words that get used several times in this section. Verses 9 and 10, verses 8 and 9, if you want to look at those two, they kind of are, those thoughts are repeated more than once here. And what's the keys? You kind of mentioned one, what God had done.
So 1 and 20.
Says, and you shall tell your son in that day, saying, this is done because of what the Lord did for me when I came up from Egypt. It shall be as a sign to you on your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, that the Lord's law may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand the Lord had brought you up out of Egypt. And that phrase, with a strong hand, is repeated several times in this whole process here, that what happened was the Lord's strong hand. But also in this process, what else happened as well here? Especially linking with the firstborn. There was kind of two things here. You had the thing of the firstborn, and then you had the unleavened bread. And they both were kind of celebrating or a memorial of the same thing, which is why Moses put it here the way he did. Because I don't know if this was his morning after speech, but this is two memorials. But what do they involve?
Firstborn.
The firstborn
And leaving Egypt
and leaving Egypt
victorious.
victoriously.
Right.
Let's look at something here. In verse 2, where it mentions, it says, consecrate to me, or in the marginal reading of the Bible, I'm using the New King James, that in the marginal reading, it says, set apart. There's a marginal reading, set apart, sanctify, consecrate to me, all kind of, the different versions use those same words, which are all kind of saying the same thing. Barbara?
I just was thinking, we were talking about the history here in which Pharaoh and whatever, that is a wonderful fact that the Bible is true and it records history as it happens. And the Egyptians, even though they lost the Pharaoh, they lost all their chariots, their military in the Red Sea, it's not recorded anywhere in their history.
Like I said, it was a big embarrassment. Like I say, when the queen had to take over, he didn't get his pyramid, did he?
No.
Didn't need it.
No,
Right.
no. In fact, it's a little bit more interesting as I got looking at some of these verses here. But it's kind of interesting because we have this word, this Hebrew word that gets translated to sanctify or to consecrate or to set apart. And if you look it up in Strong's Concordance, it actually word means to be clean. And so we're talking we're talking in the spiritual realm now, aren't we? When we clean and unclean, we're really entered into a spiritual realm of what's going on. And so, and then in following that declaration, whatever opens the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and beast, it is mine. And Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you went out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, by the strength of the hand of the Lord that brought you to this place. So there, that strength of the hand of the Lord, it comes back several times as part of the memorial, that this whole thing of the firstborn, we haven't really got into the shedding of blood, which was on a doorpost, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You know, with the taking of the life, which was a demonstration that, a life had been shed to protect that house. And in the other houses, if there was no blood on the doorstep, then who had to pay?
Firstborn.
The firstborn, yeah. So let's go actually to Numbers chapter 3, because there's something Numbers chapter 3, verses 12 and 13, if somebody would like to read that one for us. Numbers chapter 3, verses 12 and 13. Or you can start with verse 11.
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, And I, behold, I have taken the Levites from among the children of Israel, instead of all the firstborn that openeth the matrix among the children of Israel. Therefore the Levites shall be mine, because all the firstborn are mine. For on the day that I smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I hallowed unto me all the firstborn in Israel, both man and beast. Mine shall they be, I am the Lord.
So what was God's original plan for the firstborn? And you kind of have to, I didn't really read the whole story, but, there's this point here where the Levites are given the priesthood instead of the firstborn. So what was God's original plan? And this whole, you say back in Exodus, what was the plan?
The
Dave?
firstborn of every child of Israel was supposed to become priest.
Okay, and each family, right? The priest. Barbara?
That also answers our question about the firstborn always being male or the firstborn being male or female. Because the priests are always males.
Yes, and that's what comes out later when we read through this, our part of this firstborn, call for the firstborn to be consecrated. It doesn't mention, it says just firstborn, but then when you read through, it does specify the firstborn male. Mm-hmm. So we see that it was God's intent and in what he was doing here right after the Passover, that he set up a priesthood that the firstborn male in every household was to be the consecrated one, the set apart one for the family. And of course we realize that later on when things didn't go so well, thank God revised that. And this is what we're reading. We're reading actually we're not reading the whole story, but this is the story of what happened because of the golden calf and all that stuff. And the Levites was the one tribe that did not go after the worship of the golden calf, and so they became the priest, and the priesthood was put with them as opposed to the firstborn in every household. And you think about this, if God did something here that you can say mankind kind of made it so God had to change things up a little bit. But in Egypt, the firstborn bore the punishment for the land of Egypt. The sin of rejecting God. As firstborn for us, Jesus took the punishment for us, didn't we? Say he was the lamb. You know, we know that there was all, the Passover was all symbolic of Jesus, and he would, you know, by his blood. But the realization that that firstborn, those firstborn who survived that night of Passover were clean. They were set apart by the blood of the lamb, of the Passover lamb, which enabled them to be in a special place there. In fact, let's go to Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 8, verse 29, if somebody would like to read that one when you get there.
For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers, mine says, and sisters. That's the NIV.
Yeah. So basically, what Jesus did, he became the firstborn. And also, part of that definition of the firstborn, it's also it's not only a biological position, it's also a position of authority, which they would have been. You know, this was God's intent, that the firstborn were consecrated, they were set apart to be the ministry in their household, and we see that it was taken away because of the spiritual failures. Colossians chapter 1, verse 18. Colossians chapter 1, verse 18. Somebody would like to read that one.
And he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he might have the preeminence.
Now, how is Jesus to be the firstborn from the dead?
Firstborn from the dead.
Representing
It
the
was
resurrection.
resurrection from the
Right.
dead.
Okay, it was his own blood, this wasn't it? He just like the blood was on the doorpost, that there was life given, Jesus gave his own life and was able to be resurrected and became the firstborn among many brethren, as it said here between these two verses, and that in all things he may have the preeminence. So this being firstborn was not just a biological thing, but it was spiritually, he's the firstborn among all of us, isn't he?
Yes.
We're all washed in his blood. So this, what God was setting up there in Exodus was a tremendous example of the meaning of surviving the Passover by the blood of the Lamb, and that all those firstborn were alive because of the death of the Lamb. And so they were set apart, and it was God's design to be the priest of every household. Of course, that's what God was trying to do, and that was a reminder that God had saved them by a strong hand. Dennis.
People get hung up on sometimes the term firstborn and try to say that Jesus isn't God and that he was born and he was the son of God and not real God. The title, the name the firstborn is more than just born first. It has a type, it means preeminent, it means the most important. David was the firstborn, even though he was the seventh.
Right.
So we need to realize that we're talking about a title of superiority or a title of preeminence,
Mhm.
a title of firstborn has the right of
Yeah.
inheritance and head of the family. There's a whole bunch of other elements involved in being firstborn.
Yes, in fact, here, if we continue on, I'm back in Exodus 13 again. Because it kind of, Moses, he starts talking about the firstborn and it being a sign of deliverance by the strength of the hand of the Lord. And then he starts talking about the feast of unleavened bread. But then in verse 11, he comes back to the firstborn again. It says, and you shall, verse 11, it shall be when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and your fathers, and gives it to you, that you shall set apart to the Lord all that open the womb. And this firstborn concept goes through, and this is where it mentions the firstborn from an animal which you have, the males shall be the Lord's. But every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb, and if you will not redeem it, you shall break its neck. And all the firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. So it shall be when your son asks you in time to come, saying, what is this? That you shall say to him, by the strength of the hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And then it continues on to tell the story of what happened there. So this was a sign again that the firstborn were redeemed by the blood of the Lamb and were to stand as a living testimony from slavery by the hand of God. Now, what about the firstborn of the donkeys? Did anybody get curious enough to think about that for a bit? Did anybody care about the donkey? Well, I did. And as I thought about this, actually, donkeys, and I with the power of Google, I Googled donkeys' hooves. Why would I do that?
Well, as far as the clean or unclean.
Okay, yeah, there's the hoof
Right.
determines whether a herd animal was clean or unclean. The cows, the goats, the deer, they all have a split hoof. The moose. But what doesn't have a split hoof? Camels. Okay. Horses. And donkeys. Yeah, you can go on Google and you can check it out yourself. Because they tell you how a farrier is to trim the hoof of a donkey to keep its feet healthy.
Yeah.
And they, in fact, what did the donkey need?
A lamb?
Needed a lamb. Needed someone, a redemption. Someone to die in its place.
Jumps right out at you.
Yeah, I just, it's one of those things, how many times you read this story and this one said, oh, that's kind of interesting that, yeah, if it's a donkey, then it needs to be redeemed because it's an unclean animal. Which is a lesson of what?
Salvation all over again.
All right.
Because who else needed to be redeemed?
All over.
That's right.
Well, it's interesting here because what did they do with this firstborn from all these different animals?
Given to the Levites. Well, right, for the sacrifice.
I'm going to let's read verse 15 there. Verse 15 and 16. It says, and it came to pass when Pharaoh was stubborn about letting us go, and this is kind of the continued explanation when the son asked the father, and I wasn't sure if the son was asking about all the animals here or the donkey in particular, because the donkey kind of got extra space, so to speak. And it came to pass when Pharaoh was stubborn about letting us go that the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore I sacrificed, so this is the father talking to the son, says, therefore I sacrificed to the Lord all males that opened the womb, but all the firstborn of my sons I redeemed. So if he's sacrificing the firstborn that opens the womb and all the animals, what's he doing? Okay, he's offering them as a blood sacrifice, isn't it?
Right.
On an altar. And of course, he doesn't offer his sons on an altar. There's a price of redemption for his son. And it's kind of interesting because it says, and it shall be as a sign on your hand and as frontlets between your eyes, for by the strength of the Lord, for by strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt. So who gets the credit for this whole salvation adventure? God. God. There was, the people were, they were pretty questioning in the beginning, even with the plagues and stuff, but eventually they obeyed God. Now, was obedience to what the Lord required of them necessary? No? What would have happened to them if they didn't obey the Lord through this whole process?
Right. So they'd be in,
It was a change of heart which
Right.
would have led to the obedience. That was the whole thing.
Yeah.
Obedience does nothing if the heart
Right.
is not changed. That was
Exactly.
Pharaoh's problem.
right?
Yeah, if you remember back in this whole thing, when Pharaoh didn't let them go after I forget whether it was the snakes or the blood incident stuff, but the people said, Pharaoh's not listening to you.
Right.
Why should, you're saying to Moses, why should we believe you? You told us we're going to be delivered. What happened? Well, it didn't happen. So we see that this, as it mentions, part of the plagues wasn't just on the Egyptians, it was on the Israelites because they needed to learn some things themselves. Which brings us back to that question I mentioned, why didn't the Lord just snap his fingers and bring them right out of Egypt, stick them in the promised land? Could he have done that?
Yeah.
He could have.
They could have.
He could have done that, but he didn't because that wasn't what they needed. What they wanted to be taken, take us right out of slavery and put us in the promised land, but there's a way to get there. Barbara?
It's just like us with our children, when we're training them. If they do it once, we can say, oh, good, you got it forever, I'm done. And if he would have taken them out of Egypt and put them in Canaan, just like that, the people wouldn't have learned anything. Well, our kids, they need to be taught over and over and over again, just like the Israelites.
Yeah, I know I have to keep learning over and over and over again. I still need to go through this. Who is God and how mighty is his hand?
Right.
And that is his hand. In fact, I read something this week. It was a beautiful little devotion, and they were talking about whenever the boat is rocking, the storms are raging, look and see whose hand is on the tiller. And it's Jesus. Jesus is the one who's got his hands on the tiller. No matter what you think is going to happen to the boat, Jesus has his hands on the tiller. And I have to remind myself that over and over again, that Jesus. And then I realized, so maybe the problem isn't the storms that are rocking the boat, it's that us that are in the boat keep rocking the boat. There's a whole lot more truth in that than I want to get into right now. But yes,
Just a thought, that, again, we're talking about this, the heart change that needed to happen for these people. We know from the subsequent stories as we'll go through, that at every turn, they second guessed and they were not all in. So even on the night of putting the blood on the lintel and the post, they had seen, they were going through the motions, and I'm reading into that, but what, had a heart change taken place in all those people, or were they doing what they were told because they were scared they were going to lose The firstborn.
It's a learning process.
It's a learning process. Exactly.
Okay, so also in this section of the lesson, we have a basic outline for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which actually was a review because it was actually kind of given before that. So what was the reason for this feast as well? We kind of covered that. It was a reminder, wasn't it? It was to be a reminder of that night when they had to be ready to go. You know, the other night, last night, maybe the night before, they were interviewing people out in California that are near these fires. And the people were saying that they were in a zone that could potentially go an evacuation. And they were saying, yes, we've got our money and our valuables. They all have a box now. Everybody in that area's got a box that they grab it and go, and everything else gets left behind. And I was just thinking about that. We're just living that way, that you live knowing that everything that you don't want to lose gets confined to a box that you can carry and get in your car and be ready to go and lose everything else. And how many times has that happened already in the last year or two?
Yeah.
Tens of thousands of times already. But they were down to that point in life where get ready to go. Think about all the destruction they had seen, and of course they get to the part of the plagues where the Egyptians are getting hit and the Israelites are not. And then you get to this last one and said, okay, this is, if you think it's been bad up to this point, this is, and I really didn't sense it so much until this week going through this, that the firstborn, the ultimate price to be paid by the Egyptians in the rebellion was the life of their firstborn. Someone had to die because of the rebellion that was going on, and kept going on, isn't it? Because what happened, and we'll say we won't get through this whole story, but what happened? Once the Israelites got out of town, and they said, I mean, they barely had their dead buried, and they said, "Man, why did we do that?"
Right.
It seems plain to us, but it was the heart had not changed in the Egyptians, except there was some who did go with the Israelites.
Right.
Dennis.
The firstborn were the least disposable. They were the most valued of every family. You talk about my firstborn son, a child, although we say we value all equally, in their eyes, the firstborn was much more important than the rest of the kids. And to lose your firstborn is the ultimate sacrifice.
And God gave his firstborn, didn't he?
Yes.
The ultimate sacrifice, so that we could even be here and talk about this at this point in history. Okay, let's kind of continue on here a little bit. The crossing of the Red Sea in Exodus 13, starting with verse 17. Then it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go that God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near, for God said, lest perhaps the people change their minds, so when they see war and return to Egypt. So, yeah, God still had a kind of a pretty tender situation here, didn't he? He had the Egyptians whose heart had not been changed, and he had concerns here that if they had to leave Egypt, and of course it's not that long of from where they lived in Egypt, which in Goshen, which my understanding is up at the north end, up by the Mediterranean Sea, and it's all flat and grassy and great for herding and stuff, that if they had headed right up around the coast through what we now call the Gaza Strip and that stuff, they would have run right into the Philistines, and they weren't going to be happy about a whole 600,000 people, men plus women and children, coming into their neighborhood.
They weren't ready for the fire.
Yeah. And God says, no, we're going to do it a little differently. Isn't that interesting? Does God, when he saves us from our sin, does he put us right into promised land?
I think we all wish that.
We wish that, and sometimes we think that. And that's what we're all discovering, that there's other ways. And why not? Well, it was because he was concerned that they would get shaken up if they ran into what seemed to them the impossible thing. Now, one of the things that they did, what did they do when they headed out? Verse 19.
Took the bones of Joseph, yes.
Took the bones of Joseph, and also the last part of verse 18. So God led the people around by the wilderness of the Red Sea, and the children of Israel went up in orderly ranks out of the land of Egypt. You know, Moses had some unique qualifications for his job. One was that he was so shy and he didn't feel like he could speak the Egyptian language, from what we gather in our previous lessons. But what did he still have?
Organizational skills.
He was a trained military person, and not just a foot soldier. He was trained at the top end of things, so he knew what it took to. He knew the logistics of mass movements of soldiers and peoples, and so just like, you know, Paul, we all have some special things God works with that are kind of natural abilities or schooled abilities, and so Moses knew what it took to get people organized and get them moving along the way. And as it mentioned, Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had placed the children of Israel under solemn oaths, saying, God will surely visit you, and shall carry up my bones from here. Carry up my bones from here with you. And I've got a little marginal note here on this surely visit you. And that was, the marginal reading for surely visit you is give attention to you. It can be also read that God will surely give attention to you, and you shall carry up my bones. In fact, it's kind of interesting. When I saw there was a little difference here, I kind of looked at a number of Bibles. The New American Standard puts it this way. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones with you. When it's New King James, you know, God will surely visit you is what? It's a promise, isn't it? God is going to come. And do you like visits? We had kind of a nice visit yesterday. We had a visit from some people who live in Tennessee, and we've gone down there and visited them, and when they come up here, they visit with us. And yes, they were doing other things, but they called Ida and said, can we meet somewhere and just have lunch? So we met them at Newport and tried out the new IHOP restaurant there, and you know, we had an hour or so together, and then we went on our ways. But you know, it was really special. Not to go to IHOP, but no, it was okay.
It was okay. But the time.
But the time with these people, the visit, is what makes it, doesn't it? You know, every once in a while we get I have Canadians that have come across, and some have stayed at my house, and we've had people from New Hampshire, they're coming through, and they'll just take an hour, stop by and visit and go. And they're just special moments, aren't it? So this, when it says, God will surely visit you, is a special moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
It sounds, our English language, I guess, unless we stop and think about it, we take it too lightly. Yeah, God's going to visit you. He said he would. But what's the visit? When you think about the visit, it's something really special, isn't it? God is going to come and do something very special with you. And that was part of this whole thing. And due to running out of time, if you go to Genesis chapter 49 and 50, you will find that actually Isaac, or Jacob, while he was dying in Egypt, because that's where he went and he lived with his family, he made them promise to take him back. And that's a whole little story in itself, because he's basically, Abraham had set up a family burial plot. He purchased some land and there was a cave there, and it says it was on the east side of the Jordan.
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of, it wasn't in our lesson, but it was of our lesson, that whole thing. So Jacob went there. His wife Leah was buried there. So say it was the family thing. And so Joseph, when his father Jacob, Israel. Too many eyes there. So when Israel died, Joseph asked Pharaoh, he said, my father has died, and we need to bury him back in his homeland. So he took a whole bunch of Egyptians, because he was high up, had this whole big entourage that goes up to this little spot in the desert up there with the Canaanites. And they're just, read the story this afternoon. Genesis 49, chapters 49, Genesis 49 and 50, the story of that, because all the locals, can you imagine all the locals? What is going on? Why are all these Egyptians here? Because it wasn't just the Israelites bringing their father back. The whole entourage was there. And so basically, Joseph was bringing his tradition. Now, the interesting thing is that when Joseph died, what happened? They didn't do that. No, he
They
made.
were slaves, is why they didn't.
Yeah, they couldn't do what he had made them promise to take him back, because he knew what? There was a time prophecy going, wasn't there?
Right.
There was a time prophecy going. The clock was ticking. He knew they were going to go back to the promised land, so he made them promise, if I die here, you take me back, just the way I took my father back, back to the family burial plot. Anyway, just a little.
Well, Roger said, because you said that they couldn't bring Joseph back when he died because they were slaves. So, doesn't it say that Pharaoh came in and knew not Joseph?
Yes, that was the one who wouldn't let him go.
Right.
There arose a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that that maybe it's been some time that had gone by. Joseph, I don't know. It doesn't say here, but
Actually,
Joseph asked for his bones to go.
I think it's in chapter 50. You read through. They mourned Joseph for 40 days. It was a 40-day mourning period, and then they put him in a casket, basically, and that's where he stayed. He didn't get taken back to the homeland burial, and I think that's in chapter 50. Is what we're kind of running out of time, because there was one more piece of this, Laura.
The reason why Pharaoh didn't know Joseph is because there was like a revolution in Egypt, and foreigners or somebody took over, and they didn't know what had happened before. So it was a totally different dynasty.
Yeah, also, anybody remember how long that time prophecy was? It was 400, was it 430 years total?
But that
Yeah.
started with Abraham.
Yeah,
They weren't in Egypt 400 years,
Right.
Egypt proper.
okay,
They did start with Abraham.
There's a whole other thing going on. with
yeah.
that.
Okay, Exodus 14, just to quickly blast through this one. said, "Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel that they turn and camp before Pi-Hahireth between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal Shephon. You shall camp before it by the sea." And I said, okay, I'm studying this week's lesson. I need to know what those places are. And the best I can figure out is Pi-Hahiroth was actually a reference point, possibly to a geographical point out into the Red Sea. There was kind of a peninsula there.
Yeah.
And then it was also mentioned that there was two big mountains there. But what kind of surprised me, because we get this thing in our head, they went out into the wilderness and they got chased to the Red Sea and they're right in the middle of nowhere. And yes, they were in kind of a box canyon situation, but Migdol actually was a Egyptian garrison. In other words, it was a military fort defending the area, because you had this Pi-Hahiroth evidently may have been a port area, and they were defending that port because they could land stuff there, take it in between those big mountains and get it back to Egypt. So this wasn't no man's land. It wasn't a place where nothing was there. There was things there. And the other place, Baal Zephon, anybody recognize what Baal usually is associated with? Idolatry. That they believe that this was a temple, a pagan temple that was kind of, if you have a garrison on one side, you've got this heathen temple on the other side, and it may have actually been Phoenicians, because the Phoenicians were sailors and they had a presence there. So this whole idea of a port, a military garrison, and a heathen temple that may have been associated with the Phoenicians kind of makes for an interesting situation. Think about that. And so right between the military garrison and this temple, you've got this V, and they're in there and they're right up against the sea. And what happens, of course? The short story is, what happened? Pharaoh's army was destroyed, right? Yeah, we got the whole opening of the Red Sea. The Israelites went across. Pharaoh and his armies was destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
And guess who were the witnesses? The military garrison,
Yeah.
and the Phoenician temple.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the news spread?
Right.
Very interesting. I've never seen anybody talk about that, but if you research those names, it gets interesting.
Right. They're put there for a reason.
Now, without going through the whole thing, of course, the Israelites were scared. They said, what'd you do, Moses? Bring us out here because we didn't have graves and all this stuff. But we also, earlier in our study, talked about the parallels of what's going on there to today. And I'm going to read you a little bit. This is in Great Controversy, the chapter called The Final Warning, and this is in page 609. And I had mentioned this to Roger one time, and he said, where is that? And I turned here. I started going through page after page looking for this thing, because I didn't know a good keyword to search this. And it turned out that I've got it all underlined. So it stood out, because obviously when I read this, it says, Yet when the storm of opposition and reproach burst forth upon them, that is God's people, some, overwhelmed with consternation, will be ready to exclaim, had we foreseen the consequences of our words, we would have held our peace. Have you heard anything like that in our lesson this week? Did we make a mistake in what we were doing? And this is what God's people, this is God's people who have been preaching the gospel in this time of trouble to come. It says, When the storm of opposition and reproach burst upon them, some, overwhelmed with consternation, will be ready to exclaim, "Had we foreseen the consequences of our words, we would have held our peace." They are hedged in with difficulties. Satan assails them with fierce temptations. The work which they have undertaken seems far beyond their ability to accomplish. They are threatened with destruction. The enthusiasm which animated them is gone, yet they cannot turn back. Can you see the parallel between the children of Israel at the Red Sea and God's people in the time of trouble? The same trials have been experienced by men of God in ages past. Wycliffe, Huss, Luther, Tyndale, Baxter, Wesley, and it goes on. I don't want to read it all. But as the opposition rises to a fiercer height, the servants of God are again perplexed, as it seems to them that they have brought the crisis. Think about that. This is page 610. As the opposition rises to a fiercer height, the servants of God are again perplexed, for it seems to them that they have brought the crisis. But conscience and the word of God assure them that their course is right, and although the trials continue, they are strengthened to bear them. Remember that hand strengthened by the hand of the Lord? The hand of the Lord brought them out of Israel. Do you hear the similarities just echoing through this? The contest grows closer and sharper, but their faith and courage rise with the emergency. Their testimony is, "We dare not tamper with God's word, dividing his holy law, calling one portion essential and another non-essential to gain the favor of the world. The Lord whom we serve is able to deliver us. Christ has conquered the powers of earth, and shall we be afraid of a world already conquered?" But so long as Jesus remains man's intercessor in the sanctuary above, the restraining influence of the Holy Spirit is felt by rulers and people. It still controls to some extent the laws of the land. Were it not for these laws, the condition of the world would be much worse than it is now. While many of our rulers are active agents of Satan, God also has his agents among the leading men of the nations. The enemy moves upon his servants to a purpose measured that would greatly impede the work of God. But statesmen who fear the Lord are influenced by holy angels to oppose such propositions with unanswerable arguments. Thus, a few men will hold in check a powerful current of evil. The opposition of the enemies of truth will be restrained, that the third angel's message may do its work. When the final warning shall be given, it will arrest the attention of these leading men through whom the Lord is now working, and some of them will accept it. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Some of them will accept it. Even those who have been fighting for our cause aren't fully converted. They know what's right and what's wrong. They haven't figured it all out. The leading men through whom God is now working, and some of them will accept it and will stand with the people of God through the time of trouble. So, is there a parallel between our future and the children of Israel? There certainly is. Let's bow our heads. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for showing us how you've worked in the past and that you are going to work in the future, for you have not changed. You have conquered all in your Son Jesus, that you do have the power, you do have the mighty hand, and we can trust in you in all things and in all ways. In Jesus' name we pray.